Okay, I'd like to call this meeting to order here. I guess technically we're study session for our school board study session on Monday, October 25th. Welcome, and I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Stallo with the purpose and agenda.
Thank you very much. Good evening, all. The purpose of board study sessions is to share information and to have an opportunity to discuss with the goal of ensuring shared understanding and that board members have all the information that they need to take action at board meetings. Tonight we'll begin with an update related to the strategic direction that calls for fiscal accountability through operational excellence with an enrollment and budget update. And we also have several policies for review this evening. I know the board has a very robust agenda to maintain our 3-year policy review, so we'll spend some time on that as well.
Okay. With district governance and policy, Dr. Stallo did a nice job just basically going over our rules. Will be in district policy. As you can see, there's 600 or 6 series of those, and then within the budget, doing our rule on operational oversight. With that, I think we'll move on to oversight of operations with an enrollment update and budget with Julie.
Good evening, board members, Dr. Stallo. I included in your packet kind of a historical enrollment information of year end, and at the top are the actual numbers and the bottom is the graph. I don't know if I can get this to fit all in this page, but anyway, you can kind of see the first part. It's just kind of information that you've been looking for and asking about. I've given you 5 years of enrollment trends, showing our resident attending, and you can see last year, there's the dark blue line, that went down. We had been growing up until that point, and last year it went down, and a lot of that had to do with COVID and the pandemic. And then we have open enrolled out. Where did our students go? You can see that there is a slight uptick in other public schools and a slight uptick in charter schools. But we also had a slight uptick in open enrolled into our district. Tuition students are those students that may be attending a level 4 special ed program or some care and treatment. That pretty much was stable and has been over the past few years. We did have an increase in our homeschools, which was pretty significant considering the numbers. If you look, it went from 171 to 252. And then our parochial, of course, has gone down over the last few years. And then that has had an uptick last year as well. And like I said, a lot of that had to do with the pandemic. This is something that we went over as well in detail in the Finance Committee. So there were a lot of questions about that. Does anybody have questions about this information or understand? Oh, my goodness. So this is kind of where we ended up the last 5 years. And then I also put together some enrollment as far as future enrollment. And here's a graph that shows and the actual numbers, and you can see that there's one that shows us declining significantly, and there's others that show us pretty stable to slightly growing, and that's really depending on the data that we use here as well. So it's a 7-year look back, and we're showing us growing slightly. And if we just take the last 2 years, you're going to see us declining significantly simply because we had that decline. We've talked about this in great length. We've looked at other factors that impact our district. If the pandemic were to leave, what is that impact of students coming back to our district? What is the impact of growth? We've talked about some census data. As Scott County is one of the fastest growing counties in the state, and both cities are in the top 20 as far as growth. But, as we know, we have an average home value of $400,000. And so are we seeing young families coming into the district, or are we really seeing those second family, their second homes or third homes, families coming in, and maybe their students are a little older at that 6th grade or 9th grade? Moving into our district. And so I'm just looking at that and being a little cautious. We're really looking at maybe that green line, and that is what's reflected in the actual numbers above. And so you'll see just very slight increases over the next several years. And actually, in looking out in 25 and 26, there'll be a slight decline and then growing again. And that's those projections looking back over the last 7 years, averaging those out and showing that growth. But again, I'm cautious that, we want to be cautious and conservative in our numbers, but knowing that just depending on some of those other factors, that could definitely change as well.
Can I ask a question? Sure. So the weighted ratio, 7 years, was this what we used last? It was, okay.
Yes,
I can't
exactly,
remember
the
exactly.
same information.
Okay, so what you're saying is the dip in 2025 and such is kind of basically the pattern that we've had the
And
previous
as
7?
students leave, so
Yeah.
we have a big ninth grade, as that maybe leaves, and there isn't quite as many coming in, you may see a dip there.
I see, okay. So this is more like 70 to 80 a year, it looks like.
Right. In the next couple of years, it'd be 70 to 80 students in the next 2 years, each of the next 2 years.
Okay. Anyone else have any other questions?
I do.
Yep.
As far as the actual in-district versus out-of-district loss and all that, I understand that the pandemic year was a little unusual, but in general, without open enrollment, it kind of shows that our in-district flattened out, like the original demographic report said it would in about 2020. They did say it was probably going to last at least 8 to 10 years before we started to grow again, because of the number of, or the estimated value of the 18 and younger. With that in mind, is our district for that ratio, because, obviously the open enrolled and stuff like that can vary according to, the quality of our school district, we definitely want to keep up there and all that. But with that in mind, are other districts in Scott County seeing the same in-district growth rates go stagnant or slightly low, despite the fact that we're the fastest growing county? Because, the turn of homes is actually less because of the costs. And we are, as you stated, and we've always done this, attracted older students or more established families because of the price of the homes. So I'm trying to balance this out from
Well, first of all,
understanding the green versus the red.
the last time we did a demographic study was 5 years ago. And so we had growth, as you can see. We've had significant residential growth up until 1920. And then we know in July of 19, looking into the next year, we had a significant growth there as well. But because of the pandemic, that declined. And same with this year. The current year, we lost about 60 students before school started. And so we know, it's hard for me to say that because because the pandemic has had such an impact on our resident enrollment. And I think you could say the same for any other Scott County public school. I haven't looked at their data to see if their resident students have gone up or down. So I would need to dig into that as far as that goes. But since we're already in the 5th or 6th year of our demographic study, we definitely were growing. Now it's in that second part where we didn't know who the students were, they weren't born yet. And so we, of course, that flattened out at this point of the demographic study. And it might not be a bad idea to relook at doing another demographic study with what we have currently for student population. We don't have a hospital in our district, and so we're dependent on areas for births, so that's a harder thing. And we have people that move into our district. So they may not be living here when their child is born, but they may be moving in, So those are harder, I believe, for our district to look at that data as far as birth data. We can do it by zip code, we can look at all of those things, but if they're moving, that's a little more fluid. And like I said, we certainly were growing the first 4 years and anticipated 5 of 6 years of the demographic study. But again, that pandemic has had such an impact, it's hard for me to say whether that would be what it would have happened.
I know that the census numbers aren't good, but the number of births is based upon the 30-year birth cycle of how many people in the state or whatever are projected to be within childbearing years, and that, of course, was flat and going down.
It is, but where are people living? And since Scott County is the fastest growing, they could be definitely moving here for, so we could see growth where other areas would see a decline. And that is certainly true of the state itself, but not necessarily Scott County.
One of the things that I recall when the Star Trib was doing a lot of the work last year, I think that it was about a 2% decline in enrollment across the state. So again, I can't imagine other colleagues of yours who are in the same role you are doing enrollments right now through a pandemic, because I don't think you probably have a colleague who's ever done enrollment projections through a pandemic. So I think it's I think the point that you said, both this past August and the August before, where our numbers were, and then families had to make decisions based on what the state required of us 2 years ago, and then with other issues as we started this year. So I can certainly see why some of those numbers have changed significantly to where they would have been in July had the pandemic not happened.
So, like I said, we're going forward. We have to plan on what we know. So we do have some unknowns. So if things change, the pandemic lessens, people are able to send their child to school in a more normal fashion, that may change a whole lot in terms of residents coming back into our district and making different choices. And, if they've started and they move their child out in 3rd grade, maybe they wouldn't move them back until 6th grade or something like that. So it just is going to take a little bit, I believe, in order for those families to come back to Prior Lake Savage schools.
Julie, are you with these 3 lines here, are you looking for the board to talk about which line we're going to go with, or for budgeting purposes, or how is that decision going to get made?
Well, we had talked about it at FLRP, that we would look at these numbers that I've included in the top grid, which is really the green, and try and be, just because we don't know. We grew, that 100 kids this year, and so anticipating it's not quite as much for next year. It's 79 or 72, I believe. And so it's in that 70, 80 range. It's less than what we anticipated this year. But of course, that could, again, I hate to feel like a broken record here, but if the pandemic certainly changes, that could be more. Or if it gets worse, it could be less. It's, I'm trying to take data that we have, knowledge of what we've known, and say, what does that trend look like? Through a pandemic of which the trend certainly changed significantly for our district.
I have another question. How does the ADM get calculated for homeschool kids? Do we include them in here at all?
No.
Or? Okay.
We do not get anything for a homeschooled or a parochial student.
And Julie, my understanding is right now we're in the process of finding out exactly what those homeschooled numbers are. So I know we sent a mailing out to the families who haven't yet indicated whether they were continuing to homeschool. So we don't even know this year right now exactly how many of those are.
Same with parochial.
Yeah,
They're not
thanks.
required to report to us quite yet. It's coming up. Any other questions? So as we move forward with looking at budget assumptions for the future, we'll be using these numbers and looking out for 5 years. And of course, we update those every year, and as we move forward, or if we have some different information as we go through this process, we will certainly continue to look at it and update it as necessary.
Thank you for doing that.
Thanks, Julie.
Next up is board governance. And the first one up, I think that's new tonight, but has no revisions, is 532. So I don't know if anyone has any questions on that one, but I think when I looked at it,
Doesn't look like anything changed.
Nothing's changed, and I wanted to say, when was the date? I feel like we just did this one, but I know, there's a few that we just did. When?
July, it was 2020.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I knew. it
Oh,
was-
nope, it wasn't, sorry,
Oh, it's
2018.
2018.
Oh, okay. Oh, so that one's a little older. Okay. I don't know if anyone has any questions on that one. Okay. The other ones, which we've had, or no, I'm sorry,
No, these are-
401. Yep, that's you. Okay, go ahead, Jim, sorry.
All right, good evening. Several personnel policies to bring forward tonight. Most of them was very minor changes, so I'll just walk through each of those that I have, if that's okay.
Sure.
Okay. 401, this is the, including the language on gender identity that would be consistent with Policy 413, the harassment and violence policy, and there was another one. So it's just adding that verbiage in there like we did with the other two policies that have been approved.
For consistency of definition. Yep.
Okay. 404.1 is employee background checks. On the second page of that policy, all it is changing the State Board of Teaching to the Minnesota Professional Educators Licensing and Standards Board, or as we affectionately call it, PELSB.
Yep.
So that's just a change since they've changed their title. Okay.
Go ahead.
St-
question.
stop me if you
Yep,
have-
stop. Yep. go
And one of the questions that I had about the employment background checks is when we specify the criminal background checks, and it also appears somewhere else, should we be actually specifying, like the state does, when you find something that has to be an adjudicated criminal event? Or is that assumed or implied in the language of the consent form and what they're looking for?
It's a good question. I'm not sure, but most of those don't show up on a background check. It would be, if you were to go online, you find the same things that we do when the state does it. It's just that it spells out our practice of how we go through that. So I can find out specifics on that. I'm not sure, but I haven't seen the things that have been removed or adjudicated or expunged. Those things we'll see either dismissed or convicted on each of the things that show up on a background check.
And the only reason why I ask is because first of all, I do some of this stuff, but also I noted that when I had to go online and do a background check for the mentorship for Strive, that they used IntelliCorp. And IntelliCorp is one of the tools that does not report anything other than adjudicated. But if we switched services, some of them will go into Pacer and stuff like that, and show federal and state stuff that isn't yet tried, and then show up on the report, and you've got to choose that. So I wasn't sure if, based upon the tool, we wanted to specify that.
I think I would, this is consistent with MSBA's proposed language. I have a hard time with background checks going against their legal advice, I guess, because they have obviously legal look at this, but I can ask the question.
It just that in some instances, and maybe it's just, maybe you guys would never, ever, you'd have it pre-done because we're a school district, but there is some risk when something shows up, but it isn't yet adjudicated, that it could cause bias or discrimination. And so if somebody gets off, then, and they don't get the job because of the way it looks,
No, we can't.
yeah. You're not supposed to, but,
Yeah.
I know, but if somebody sees it and they don't get a job, then you
Right.
kind of good not to even go down that path.
Yeah, I can ask the question.
Okay.
So that was the only change there. Policy 405, veterans preference, the only change is the one that's noted on there, upon stated charges, I think just to had specificity around that. So that was the only one on 405. 414, the mandated reporting, the changes that MSBA recommended, we already had put in there. We just changed some formatting pieces to line up better with the way that MSBA had laid out the policy. the changes the most recent changes that were in there, if you're wondering, and why we just didn't bring this forward with no changes, is on the second page under G, and it's the definition of sexual abuse, and the words that were added. And again, we just did this not too long ago, so we added them. But is in G, in the first sentence, adding current or recent in line 3. So again, some specificity around there. And then if you go down to line 6, where it says solicitation of children, that phrase, solicitation of children, to the period of that sentence was another add. And again, adding some specificity to this definition.
You are missing a comma on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, on line 6 when you took out the as well as.
Yeah, we got to take that out yet. That's
Okay.
still in the, if you go on our website, that strikeout is in there, so we got to fix that.
Okay.
So, okay, and then chemical use and abuse, policy 417. The add to there is to include in the definitions and the general statement, medical cannabis. So that's, falls under that because by state law, you can't have illegal drugs on school property. So even though it is legal to prescribe, it needs to be added in there as well. Okay. 419, tobacco-free environment. The thing that this is, there's quite a few changes in here. What we did is took the MSBA policy, and all the changes relate to vaping awareness and prevention instruction. So even in the title, you'll see it used to just go through the second semicolon and stop after devices. Now the title has vaping awareness and prevention instruction. And if you want to see the majority of those changes and what they mean, if you go back on page 2, the bottom of page 2 on the vaping prevention instruction, it's very specific in the new state law. Well, it's not so new anymore, but we're updating our policy. That in grades 6 through 8, they have to get vaping prevention instruction at least once. And it gives some other things in there related to that. So that's the change in the tobacco policy. The last time vaping things went in there, this time we're adding the prevention and instruction piece, so.
I have a question, and this is, this isn't mentioned in there, but if a student is caught vaping, are we legally allowed to take the device away? Or how does that work? It's not mentioned in here.
On a practical level, Dan, do you? Yep. Yep.
And Mark, do you want to come up? We need you at the microphone, though, so they can hear. Got a couple principals here. Prior Lake High School Assistant Principal Mark Paulson will share some insights. Thank you.
Practice has been when we find a vape or any kind of contraband, we confiscate and then would give it over to the police department, the police liaison officer, and then they would take it from there.
Thank you.
Jim, is this MSBA's recommended language?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep. Yes. I think that's it, isn't it? Did I miss one?
902, is it?
I think Gina's going to.
Okay, so this is more about cleaning up the documents for 902. There were some kind of outdated procedural, and it was assigning the appropriate personnel for different things. So the changes are either struck out or they're bolded and double underlined. Like I said, it was mostly about cleaning up the documents. If there were duplications, making sure those were kind of cleaned up, and deleting items that weren't relevant anymore. As you've reviewed it, do you have any questions offhand?
The only question I would have, the changes in policy 2 and 3 are to note what we are doing in practice now. I mean, it's already been in practice, right? The change, as far as the 100%,
Yes.
because that was changed previous.
Well, the initial reason that came up, which has been a few years ago, is we had some clubs coming in that were not 100% district youth. But we actually kind of have that already covered because we do a historical thing, which is part of our policy. So in guidelines, if, we're going to have our youth groups are still going to take priority over those other youth groups because of
Their
the
percentages.
historical piece
Yeah.
of it. So we're
Okay.
not actually, they're not
Oh,
fighting
I see
for,
what you're saying.
it was more of a way to get people not fighting for space.
Yeah, okay. But this is in practice already, like,
Yes.
how
Yes.
it's noted, yeah.
Yes.
That's all, I just wanted to recognize that this has already been in practice for
Yeah.
the most part. And this is, like you said, just cleaning it up. Okay. Any questions, other questions on that one? Okay, thank you,
Thanks,
Gina.
Gina.
All right. Second read on policies, these have been around here for a few meetings. I don't think, unless anybody has anything specific, I think they've been in here. Haven't heard anything from anyone, so. Those will move on until, to our board meeting in November. What else is next? Let's see. Let's review those. Superintendent relations.
Nothing this evening.
Okay, informational items, e-learning update. Dr. Edwards.
As you recall from board meeting 2 weeks ago, mentioned a need to update our e-learning language, something that we had put in place. The state had given us the authority to put that in place a couple of school years ago. We did so. We didn't have an update to that last year due to everything that was going on. We weren't in person during the bulk of the winter season. But we are assuming we are going to continue to be in person. And so, again, the legislature gives us the opportunity to create e-learning days in the case of inclement weather. And you have in front of you a summary document that was put on your table tonight that we intend to send out to families on Wednesday. We'll be sending out a communication to staff on Wednesday that has a little more context around it, and then this will be the document that will be sent to families and will then be posted on our website and updated. There already is something that's there from a couple of years ago. So, any
Dan, you
questions?
just share a little bit the process that you went through to update this, because again, we put this in place and then never used it, and then the pandemic hit, so we wanted to be sure that we did a review of it. So if you just want to share a little bit of the process, and I know it didn't change significantly, but there are some changes.
Yeah, we took what we had learned through implementing e-learning or distance learning and used those lessons learned from what we had done since we last had put this in place, and took many of those components and reviewed this with representatives at the secondary and the elementary level. And we are delineating, as you can see on that document, what the procedures would look like. And also different is now all students have a device that they have with them and are able to have with them at home. That was different, as you recall, when we last did this. We only had devices 8, 12 in the hands of all students. So this was modified to account for that as well. And also we have experience, as you all know, with utilizing our technology, such as Google Meet, for example, to host meetings with our students. So we feel like we can continue the learning process in these days through e-learning if we have inclement weather situations. And again, this was prompted to historically bring you back the year that there were, I think, 6 snow days that we experienced as a district. So we're not looking for that to happen again. We're hoping not, but we won't have lost learning to the level that we did in those years.
Okay, any questions? Comments? Go ahead, Mary.
Well, I know before the pandemic, there was, obviously we developed this right beforehand. But there's other schools in the state, and I remember Farmington did an NPR interview. You remember that? And they talked about when they were implementing and starting this whole process, that they actually had practice days. And I know we've had a whole year of practice on this, but still the transition to go from in-classroom to e-learning is still a transition. And I was wondering if we're planning on maybe, as we mature the process, if we, instead of using an inclement day, actually declare an e-learning day to practice it before an actual event.
So the guidance, the guidelines and legislative action on this does not call for, it says it needs to be determined as an inclement weather day. So it doesn't, at least in my interpretation of that, I think our interpretation of that would be that that is not allowed at this point. Again, what you're referring to at Farmington had done, that was before any of this had gone into effect. And so they took the liberty, did some practice days, and I think they and a couple other districts kind of led the legislature to give some guidance on this. And the guidance that came out of that was in case of inclement weather. So it's pretty prescriptive with regard to that. But that being said, I think that now that we'll be communicating out, I think certainly students, families, and staff will be prepared, and I would imagine doing some preparedness in their classrooms as well, leading up to, because we have lots of predictors of when these things come up. Again, our first one would not include this, but their forecasters are pretty good about giving us information to know that when it might be coming. So.
And that might be something the board wants to consider as we meet with legislators and look at our legislative platform to see if that would be something we'd advocate for, more of that flexibility. You know, there are times that, you know, maybe water mains break or things like that happen that aren't necessarily related to the weather that we'd want, you know, to have some flexibility on. So as we're thinking about that legislative platform, might be some flexibility we want to continue to pursue. Again, I think as Mary said, we've had a year of doing this, so it seemed a little silly in some ways to go back to this document when our teachers and our students and our families have demonstrated competence in distance learning.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right. Then next up is the American Education Week events. Martha, I don't know, did you have any type of update from the kitchen?
I did not hear
Okay.
back from Emily yet. I can ask her.
Okay. I think just in looking back, I looked back at 2019, because obviously we didn't do it last year, where we had tours kind of scheduled into the buildings. I think some of them you were on, some of you weren't. I mean, it just depended on the schedules. But we scheduled board members in to make sure that we would get in there, and generally the kitchen staff had made us bars and that kind of thing. But given their staff levels, we kind of don't want to stress them out with bars. Well, then they were going to look at cookies was one option, or we can also purchase outside. So the board members pay for this ourselves. So I think if everyone's okay with that, I think I'll probably just pursue that option maybe. Yeah, I don't think so.
To the option to purchase?
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, we purchase every year, but I meant purchase from outside to
Yes,
not stress the
outside.
staff out. Yeah, for cookies. So we'll just look at that. And I think Martha will just get a schedule, kind of how we did it last time. Kind of spread it out through the week and just make sure. And, you know, we can go 2s and 3s together and that kind of thing and go around.
I know we're deciding on cookies. Do we get any feedback from the teachers that they're there? Do they want cookies? Would they rather have something else? I don't know. How does that feedback work?
Well, I know they enjoyed the bars, but it's a little bit easier to transport bars when they're in the same kitchen. I mean, they're made, they're made in the building. It's not like it's being transported. So I don't know. I guess we can talk offline if it's something else we want to give them. I don't.
Well, I just wasn't sure if somebody gave us feedback or something like that. on
They
what
like the bars,
prefer.
I know that.
Yeah,
But, right. I mean,
Just curious.
yeah. No, I know they like them. Right, Sean? They like the treats. Yeah, I mean, I know they like them. So, yeah, we'll work to find something that works best, but we'll take it out of line, so it's not on staff. Okay,
I did
and then
have one
Martha
other-
will, go ahead.
I did have one other item when you're done
Oh,
with that.
sorry.
No,
Oh, yeah,
no
go
worries.
ahead.
I didn't have it down there, but I did want to just give just a final informational update around the tech levy with only 1 week left, or just shy of a week left before Election Day. I want to remind people that this year there's only one item on the ballot, and that's the funding request for the technology levy for our schools. The levy request is based on the increasing importance of technology in classroom teaching, maintaining our school safety and security systems, technology support staff, and more. It's also in response to increasing pressure on our budget from insufficient state funding, increasing student needs, and our ongoing commitment to educating all learners to reach their full potential. Our job is and has been to ensure that people have the facts about the technology levy request so that they can make an informed decision when they vote on Election Day. To find out more about the request, again, we've got a plethora of information on our website. We'd love for community members who have any questions to go to the website to look at that information, or certainly contact me or anyone from my office if there are any questions. I also want to remind people that they don't have to wait till Election Day to cast their vote. Early voting is underway at the District Services Center right here now through November 1st. We even have some extended hours tomorrow and Wednesday, October 26th and 27th, 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. And we're open this Saturday, October 30th, from 9 o'clock a.m. to 3 o'clock p.m. The last day to vote early is Monday, November 1st, from 8 o'clock a.m. to 5 o'clock p.m. Thank you.
Next up, public forum. There's no forums this evening. And then next would be a closed session for discussing negotiation strategy. So the meeting is going to be closed in accordance to the open meeting law, Minnesota statute 13D03, for the purpose of discussing negotiation strategies. And we'll take a 5-minute break as we transition. Thank you.